The Megalodon was indisputably the top, apex predator of its time. This isn't debated by science, history, or anyone with a brain. But being an apex predator just means you have no natural predators. It doesn't necessarily mean you have zero predators. And it definitely doesn't mean you can't be hurt. Being top of the food chain means that nothing above you eats you. But what about the things beside you? See, the prehistoric era the Megalodon lived in what was called the Mosents. And during this time period, there were exactly two apex predators at the top of the food chain. One a giant shark and the other one a giant whale. This was the Leviathan, a whale that looks pretty similar to sperm whales, but was effectively what you'd get if you put one on steroids. Their teeth were double the size, and they had a whole another row too. And unlike sperm whales, they were macro predators, which means instead of going after big squids or being like other whales that only eat plankton, Leviathan would hunt other whales. Oddly enough, Leviathans were actually shorter than sperm whales, and yet, if they were still around today, would absolutely destroy any sperm whale in an even match. But how did they get so strong? Why were they single-handedly the only other animal Megalodon wouldn't approach? And what made them go extinct? To find out, we have to go back million years ago to the most violent ocean in Earth's history. The full name, Leviathan Melville, was named after Herman Melville, the guy who wrote Moby Dick. Leviathan stems from the same word that means Leviathan, and it's not a coincidence they sound kind of similar. Scientists actually tried naming it Leviathan Melville originally, but they gave the name Leviathan to a mammoth-like animal already, so they got stuck with the knockoff name. But if sperm whales were bigger, why were scientists trying to give them such a godlike name in the first place? See, modern sperm whales can reach up to, or even long, whereas the Leviathan is estimated to be around 2. So, on paper, the modern version is technically the giant one, but length isn't everything. If you saw a sperm whale in a Leviathan side to side, you wouldn't be looking at the tail. You'd just be looking at the mouth. The sperm whale is long, sure, but it has a narrow, underslung jaw with tiny teeth that are basically useless for combat. The Leviathan, on the other hand, sacrificed the extra length for sheer bulk and power. It had a shorter, thicker skull that was reinforced to withstand the shock of ramming into other whales at full speed. And this build is basically what made the Leviathan completely overpowered. They had the largest functional teeth of any animal to ever exist, which doesn't mean tusks like elephants or walruses have. These are teeth designed for actual violence. Each one was over a foot long, around, and nearly thick. This is how one would look compared to a T-Rex tooth. That's over double the size. And unlike modern sperm whales, which only have teeth on their bottom jaw, Leviathan had massive teeth on the top and the bottom. This is the biggest thing that points us towards believing that Leviathans were competing with Megalodons. See, modern sperm whales are suction feeders because their job is to dive deep into the void, find a gigantic squid, and basically slurp it up like a slippery noodle. They don't really need to chew, so they lost their top teeth entirely. This is one of the unique things you can see in nature. You can predict an animal's diet without ever seeing it eat solely based off its mouth. Having teeth on both jaws allowed live to bite down on large prey and tear massive chunks of flesh by thrashing its head, which is pretty similar to the death roll of a crocodile. So they're insanely overpowered and could actually hunt other tanky animals. But the obvious question now is who would win in a fight between a Megalodon and Leviathan? Well, as much as I'd like to make up a sick story about these giants absolutely mauling each Other, I won't just spout up a fake scenario based off whatever vibes I feel. In reality, we don't actually know who would win, and we don't have any direct proof that they fought. We still haven't found any Megalodon teeth in any of the Lividan bones. But what we do know, though, is that a battle would definitely not be completely one-sided. Both of these creatures were the biological limits of ocean predators. They were single-handedly the two most dangerous predators to ever exist. And because of that, realistically, a fight might just kill them both. What likely happened is this created some sort of prehistoric Cold War in the ocean. These animals weren't smart, like humans, but they weren't dumb. Attacking each other would be for a reason, and that reason would either be food itself or reducing competition. If they did clash, it would be the Cold War, equivalent of a mutually assured destruction. A Megalodon bite could crush the whale's ribs, but one good chomp from a Livian could sever the shark's pectoral fins or crush its spine, leaving the shark immobile and sinking. And in the ocean, if you can't swim, you're dead. In reality, most adults likely avoided each other at all times because they both know that even if one of them won the fight, there would be no real winner. But animals aren't always logical. At some point, they must have fought, right? So, what would happen if they did? Well, whales are mammals, which means they are warm-blooded, while the Megalodon was much more efficient than your average goldfish. It still couldn't match the sustained energy levels of a mammal. Olivian could stay active, aggressive, and fast for a much longer period of time. 1 hour later, in a fight of endurance, the whale would win. But endurance doesn't always matter. If the fight ends in one hit, estimates for the Megalodon put it somewhere between along estimates for the live and work too. So in terms of length, it's basically a draw. If you saw them both while swimming, you probably wouldn't be able to tell who's longer without a measuring tape. And even so, they'd probably eat you before that point anyway. But weight is where things get interesting. See, the Megalodon was built like a great white, but thicker. It was stocky, robust, and essentially a swimming wall of muscle. Conservative estimates put the Megalodon anywhere from to tons, with some scientists thinking the absolute largest females could have reached over tons. The Leviathan was only around 2 tons. This is interesting because in modern day, almost all whales are way heavier than sharks. They're full of blubber and other thick and dense ways to keep their body intentionally massive. Sharks benefit from being more light and agile. It's strange because the roles of these animals are almost completely reversed. Lividan is much sleeker and agile than the Meg, and the Meg is heavier than the whale. Lividan was also likely much smarter than the Meg, but obviously if you put a human and a lion in a cage, intelligence doesn't guarantee a win. In most cases, most people suspect that a Megalodon would win about of the time, but the fight is extremely close. Unless we find more evidence, we really just don't know. The sizes of these animals are too ambiguous, and the amount of force they could deliver is just not exactly known either. What we do know is they're both big and deadly. They competed over early Bane whales, but it was usually easier to just go after those instead of trying to take another apex predator down. So, when and why did these creatures actually fight in a realistic case? Or did they just side-eye each other the entire time? The real violence happened in the nursery. Basically, they were spawn camping. See, Megalodons didn't just give birth anywhere. They had specific nurseries, which were shallow, warm coastal waters where the pups could grow up safely away from the deep ocean, where the adults lived. And when I say pups, I mean a baby that is already long and ready to kill. But to a full-grown Leviathan, a shark isn't a threat. It's an easy meal. The whale could use its size and sonar to pick off the future apex predators before they even hit their teenage years. It's the ultimate strategy. Eliminate the competition before they get big enough to bite you back. And you also get a free snack. But it went both ways. Livedon was a whale, which means it was a mammal, and mammals have to nurse their young. Sperm. Whales are known for having extremely strong family bonds, traveling in pods to protect the calves. If a calf strayed a little too far from mom, or if the pod got separated in a storm, that calf is done. And this is likely where the Megalodon had the advantage, while Liebens probably had to rely on brute force and gang violence to stay safe. The Megalodon was a solitary ambush predator. It could wait in the murky depths, completely invisible, until the calf was vulnerable. While we'd like to imagine these guys clashing in the ocean like Godzilla versus Kong, the reality is probably a lot darker. The war between the Megalodon and the Livedon was likely a war of attrition, killing each other's children to ensure their own species stayed on top. But eventually the war ended. And guess who won? Surprisingly, neither of them. Everyone else did. Around a million years ago, the Earth started to change. The planet cooled down. The early Bane whales they both ate couldn't handle the cold, so they started dying out or evolving into massive open ocean whales we see today, like blue whales which migrated to the freezing poles to feed. The Leviathan and the Megalodon were stuck. They were metabolic furnaces that needed warm water to survive. They couldn't follow the food into the cold, so the Megalodon starved to death because it was too big to chase the fast new whales. The Leviathan starved to death because its food source literally vanished. And who survived? Well, for one, the sperm whale, and all the other ones who weren't trying to be the king. They just dove deep, ate squid, and minded their own business. It's the ultimate evolutionary irony. The biggest, strongest, and deadliest animals are actually the most fragile. You become so specialized at killing one specific thing that when the world changes even a little bit, you're the first one to go extinct. Your entire existence as an apex predator is reliant on your non-apex prey. But this rivalry actually teaches us something incredibly important about how nature works. The ecological ceiling. See, there is a reason we don't have sharks or killer whales today. It's not because they couldn't evolve. It's because the math doesn't. Check out the Livedon and Megalodon represent the absolute upper limit of how big a predator can get before the laws of thermodynamics destroys your existence. To be a fast, active hunter at that size requires a caloric intake that is, frankly, stupid. You need an ocean that is essentially an all-you-can-eat buffet that never closes. And the second that buffet runs out, you crash hard. It's actually incredibly rare for an ecosystem to support two super predators of this size at the exact same time. Usually nature follows the rules. There can only be one. The fact the Megalodon and the Liaton coexisted for millions of years is a testament to just how insanely rich and dangerous the mining ocean really was. It was a biological anomaly. But even though the monsters are gone, the game is still being played. If you look at the ocean today, we see a spooky echo of this ancient rivalry. We have the great white shark, a solitary, cold-blooded ambush predator. And we have the orca, a warm-blooded, highly intelligent pod-based mammal. Today, the fight is a bit more one-sided and the mammal wins. When orcas show up, great whites flee. It's basically a low-budget reenactment of the Leviathan versus Megalodon war, just scaled down for modern audiences. So what else survived? Well, as I mentioned, sperm whales still stayed alive, but they fill a completely different niche than Leviathan. Both the Leviathan and the modern sperm whale have this massive tank of waxy oil in their foreheads. It's what gives them that weird boxy head shape, but they use it for two very different game modes. For the modern sperm whale, this organ is a flashlight. They hunt in the midnight zone where sunlight doesn't exist. Giant squids are fast, slippery, and invisible, so they use spermacety, organ to focus sound waves into a narrow beam like a biological sniper. Scope to see the squid in the dark. It's purely for navigation and detection. But the Liven lived near the surface. The water was bright. It didn't need a flashlight to see a whale. So why keep the massive organ? Well, this is speculative, but it's possible for the Leviathan. It wasn't a flashlight, but actually a flashbang. By blasting a concentrated burst of sound at an enemy like a Megalodon or a flaying whale, it could be loud enough to physically stun them or cause some sort of sensory overload. This wouldn't just be hearing a loud noise. This would be a sound wave so intense it vibrates your water-filled tissues, causing disorientation, nausea, or even temporary paralysis. This is not proven, though. But if there was an animal that were to use a biological sonic weapon like this, Leviathan would be the number one candidate. It might have only been against smaller animals, though, and not in their fantasy battle against Megalodons. Still, the modern sperm whale is not a complete downgraded version of the Leviathan. They're definitely not completely peaceful, and it is currently still the largest tooth predator on the entire planet. Yes, blue whales are bigger, but they eat microscopic krill. You aren't exactly intimidated by a guy eating soup. They resemble what Leviathans have to be today to survive, which means dropping their hyperaggression, but not all of it. For the other animals that survived, though oddly enough it was most of the prey, blue whales, which are bane whales, became even bigger than Megalodons or Leviathans did. Now they're basically untouchable when fully grown to any shark or predatory whale. The only reason blue whales were even allowed to get this big was because of the extinction of the Megalodon and Leviathan. With the two bullies of the ocean gone, the bane whales suddenly had access to an unlimited food supply. With zero threats, their limiter was broken. For millions of years, there was a biological size cap. If a whale tried to grow massive and slow during the Miocene, it wasn't beneficial. It just made you a more attractive dinner. Being a slow-moving meat tube just made you an easier target for the Megalodon. The predators were literally eating the competition down to size. Interestingly, if Megalodons or Leviathan were to encounter a blue whale today, it's not super likely they would still attack them. They're simply too big. The bane whales got a few million years to evolve without being held back. And now, even if somehow Megalodons were able to come back, they might not be able to take them down anymore. One strike from a blue whale could render the Megalodon crippled for life. And even though Megalodons aren't super smart, they'd be smart enough to realize they shouldn't be going after prey that big. Of course, this doesn't mean that blue whales would hunt Megalodons either. It would just be the same battle of, I'm ignoring you. But as fun as it is to play fantasy matchmakers with extinct monsters and modern giants, there is a massive problem with trying to figure out exactly what happened back then. See, the ocean is really, really good at hiding the bodies. We still barely know anything. We have never found a full Megalodon skeleton. We only have one really good skull of Olivia. The Megalodon ruled the ocean for a million years. Yet because its skeleton was made of cartilage, the same squishy stuff in our ears, the ocean has removed so much of the evidence of it ever being around. We have the teeth, so we know it could bite, but we have no idea how it moved. Did it have massive petrol fins to make tight turns like a fighter jet, or was it built for straight-line speed? Without the cartilage, we're just guessing the shape of the engine. And for the Liaton, the evidence we wish we had is soft tissue. See, we have the skull.